So before I jump into today's video, I do just want to say a huge thank you to all my new subscribers, and a thank you to everyone who engages with my videos, whether it's just hitting like or whether you're hitting like and leaving a comment. Those things are helping me to grow my channel and get my videos out to a greater audience. I also want to say a thank you to those people who in the last week or so have bought me coffees. So that's an app where you can basically buy me a coffee, which is funding for my channel. That money that's been coming in is, I'm putting it all towards buying a good quality microphone for my channel. So, I've got a goal there, and so it's great that people are supporting me with buying me a coffee. It's getting me closer to that goal. So thank you so much to those people who have done that. Now, today's video is not the one that I had intended to do. I actually have two other videos set to go, or mostly set to go, but the prerequisite for today's video was something that I could basically jump into without having to do any editing of the original video. I basically had a blinding migraine for 2 days, so anything that allows me to not look at the screen too much is the way to go for me today. So I'm actually going into this completely blind. I've looked at the first part of her video, and it seems to me that it's a bit of a negative video. And I will point out that she's given it the title 10 Things I Hate About Australia, but she's actually talking solely about Sydney from what I can see, from what I've looked at thus far. So I wanted to jump in and have a look and see what else she has to say. So let's have a look at this video, 10 Things I Hate About Australia.
So today I thought I'd take you through what I dislike about living in Australia. And if you don't already know, I live in Sydney. Don't get me wrong, I really love this city. It is a beautiful city and we're very, very lucky to be living in Australia. But there are some downfalls to living in Australia. So if you're looking to move here, or if you're just curious about the life of a typical Australian, please keep watching. First one is light rail and train systems. Honestly, my husband and I have traveled to quite a few places. We're very, very lucky that we were able to. And when we use public transport overseas, it was just so seamless. Everything was on time. Trains weren't delayed or anything like that. And in Sydney, it just feels like no one can get it right. Even though I don't catch public transport now that I drive predominantly most of the time, it still bugs me though. Whenever you need to catch a train, it seems like there's always delays. It seems like there's always problems, track works. When you're commuting to work, I honestly sympathize for those who use public transport because it's just such a hassle.
Okay, I would like to hear from Sydney-siders on this one, to hear their perspective. Just a quick look through Google, and it appears that there are issues with public transport in Sydney. But I think it's probably fair to remind people here that while she is claiming that this is about Australia, she is only talking about Sydney here. In Melbourne, the trains are pretty much on time. Buses, I don't know, haven't travelled on a bus in, well, I don't think I've travelled on a bus in Victoria. Likewise, I haven't seen issues with the trams. Both New South Wales and Victoria do have websites that you can look on to see if there are going to be delays. So we've had a lot of track work and stuff going on in Victoria. They're putting in new stations, etc. There's this big infrastructure that they're putting in. And there have been instances, for example, where from Bendigo you've had to go part way by bus instead of all the way by train to get to Melbourne. But these are things that you are informed of well in advance. And having a quick look on Google, there is a website for public transport in New South Wales that has these similar notifications. So while clearly there was an issue, and probably still is, with public transport in Sydney, I don't know if it's just one area, but at the same time, they do have a website which allows people to anticipate when there is going to be track work and delays and stuff like that. So, a fair call, but let's say it as it is. This is Sydney she's referring to. I can't speak for Brisbane, I can't speak for Perth, Adelaide. I can comment on Victoria. I can comment on Tassie, and even though it's pretty crappy in terms of public transport, the buses are usually pretty much on time, even though you do have to wait quite a while in between buses just because that's the way it is.
Second one is traffic. I know that we're pretty good with traffic compared to most of the cities around the world. However, you cannot get anywhere under an hour in Sydney. It's just impossible unless you're going to the next suburb over, which is about 20 to 30 minutes. It's just not possible to get somewhere less than an hour.
Okay, so my concern so far with this video is not inaccuracies, but the fact that she's talking about Sydney, but she's titled the video Things I Hate About Australia. So if people from overseas are looking at this and she's describing conditions in Sydney, having read the title Things I Hate About Australia, they're going to, in their heads, think that this is what it is like in every city in Australia. Sydney traffic is horrendous. I will give you that. I do not enjoy driving through Sydney, and it has limited what I've done when I've been to Sydney in the past. If I can find a way of skipping Sydney completely, I will, because I do not enjoy driving there. Melbourne, starting to head that way too. I've noticed the last 12 months or so the traffic has gotten even worse in Melbourne, and there seem to be worse drivers. But that is just the two big cities. Outside of those two big cities, the traffic isn't so painful. So I think it would have been better had she titled the video Things I Hate About Sydney, so that people could understand that what she's talking about is not representative of the entirety of Australia.
Number 3, everything is super expensive. You're pretty much going to end up spending quite a bit if you're living in Sydney, and that includes rent, that includes mortgages, that includes pretty much everything.
Again, we can't argue with her on that one. It is known that, property prices, for example, in Sydney are insane. The cost of living in Sydney is insane because it is a really popular place. It has, I think it's now the second largest population, because I think Melbourne wins now, is above Sydney. So yes, she's correct here, but once again I have to pull her up on the fact that she has misnamed this video and she is misrepresenting Australia. She should have titled the video things, like I said, Things I Hate About Sydney, and should be perhaps doing a little bit of research here and saying, well, look, okay, this is what Sydney's like, but hey, if you go to this area further north or further south of Sydney, it's not like this. But she's not doing that. So she is representing conditions in Sydney as being, this is what Australia is like.
Number 4, house prices are through the roof. They are super expensive. It's hard to get a mortgage and the house prices are just ridiculous here. Like, you won't find anything under a couple million that's close to the city.
Okay, so she didn't even qualify that one with saying that she's talking about Sydney. So the impression she's giving there is that everywhere in Australia, if you want to buy a house, you're screwed because it's going to cost you a couple of $1 million. And we know that that's not the case. You go to regional areas or you go outside the big city areas, and yes, things are a struggle at the moment, but housing prices aren't anywhere near what they're like in Sydney. So she is definitely misrepresenting Australia here and giving the impression that she's talking about the entire country, which is really frustrating.
Number 5. Now this one just gets me riled up. It's super frustrating, especially when you're working from home. Number 5 is internet. Internet is super slow. We had broadband and now the government is changing it to be NBN, and NBN is a lot slower than broadband, and pretty much you kind of just have to pay more if you want a high speed.
Now this video is about 4 years old, I believe, so I can't comment too much on Sydney explicitly in terms of internet speeds. Now we know that Australia is lagging somewhat in terms of internet speeds compared to other countries, but she's talking about Sydney. Now I live in Bendigo and my internet speeds certainly don't hamper my ability to work from home. And I would imagine that in Sydney, internet speeds would be far better. So I'm just curious what it is that she does that requires super speedy internet, and why she has to pay higher rates for faster internet. Because for your average person, unless you're in a regional area, and like I mean a more isolated regional area, while the internet is slower, it shouldn't impact that much on your ability to do your job.
We have to pay to use a certain highway or a certain road. For example, when I drive to work, I take a toll road, and that toll road each way is about $8. And you can imagine 5 days a week to and from work, the $16 a day. You do the math on how much it costs me a year to go to work and come back.
Hang on, I'm confused now. Didn't she just say that she works from home? On one hand she says she works from home, so the internet speed is a pain in the bum, and now she's talking about the tolls in Sydney and that it's costing her $16 a day to get to and from work. That doesn't really add up. Now, I have heard that tolls in Sydney are pretty phenomenal. I don't recall the cost that I paid when I was there last time. I think I just sort of, waited for it to come and then paid it and didn't even look at the price. But I have heard that the tolls in Sydney are kind of substantial. But part of the reason for that is because of congested traffic. So you have an option, and that option is to use public transport. So, it's, yeah, she can say, well, public transport is slow and it takes you a while, there's delays and everything. But, that's the price of living in Sydney. You either find somewhere to live that is close to your work, or you accept that you are going to have to commute. Classic example, my father lived in the Blue Mountains. He worked in Sydney. He used to catch a train every day from Katoomba down into Sydney and then back again in the evening, because he chose where he wanted to live. So he accepted that with that came the time spent travelling. I'm pretty certain that were she to actually go with public transport, that it would probably still take about the same amount of time, and it would probably save her money on fuel and tolls. So, I think it's a choice that people have to make. And sure, if you are going somewhere and you happen to be going through a toll, you accept that. But if your daily route to work means that you are paying $16 a day in tolls, presumably she's also paying for parking, wouldn't you just go with public transport?
Number 7. The Sydney city is not central to all of the surroundings. What I mean by that is if you look on a map and you see Melbourne side by side to Sydney, Melbourne city centre is in the centre of the suburbs. Sydney is actually the opposite. It's tucked away in a little corner where all of the suburbs are just all the way around it. So essentially what it is a bottleneck. So everyone that tries to get into the city, it ends up being a bottleneck because everyone's just going in the same direction, using all the same roads. In my opinion, it's just shit.
Well, tell it how it is, why not? So she has essentially said here that she is working in the CBD area. So she's clearly paying parking. So that goes back to my earlier comment of, if the traffic is such a pain in the bum for you and it is being so costly with tolls, etc., why not take public transport? And if she's working in the CBD, sure, she's saying that maybe there are delays sometimes with public transport, it's not great, but I would have thought that would be in the outer suburbs. I would imagine that the public transport going to and from the city would have to be fairly decent. So, I mean, I know I certainly wouldn't want to be driving directly towards the CBD area. Heck, just driving around the outer suburbs of Sydney is a nightmare at times. So, yes, I will pay her that in terms of it's not an ideal setup, but, it's a bottleneck because people are driving when they could use public transport.
Number 8, you can forget about going to the beach in summer if you don't like crowds, because fun fact for you, beaches in Australia are gorgeous nonetheless, but beaches in Australia get packed with tourists 9 times out of 10 on every single day of the weekend. So unless you're not working full-time, chances are you're going to have to go on a weekend, and even if you do, it's going to be super busy. There is no way in hell, if it's above 37 degrees, that you will see me at the beach. No, you won't see me at the beach because it gets super packed. There's so many people on the beach. So unless you like that, that's fine. Everyone's different. But for me, you will not see me at the beach in the summer.
So once again, she's clearly talking about beaches in the inner Sydney area and claiming that that is what beaches are like all round Australia. There are so many places in Australia where you can go to the beach any day of the week, and if you go on a weekday when people are working, chances are you may well have that beach all to yourself. But if it's a weekend, even if it's hot, it's not going to be as crowded as what she's showing there in those images. In Tassie, the rare hot days that you get in Hobart, people flock to 7 Mile Beach, but the main issue there is with trying to find somewhere to park, not with trying to find a spot on the beach that isn't crowded. If you look at other beaches in other states, unless it is close to a city area, then they're not going to be crowded. You just have to look at the various travel shows the travel videos that are on the internet here on YouTube to see what so many beaches are like here in Australia. Yeah, sure, if you want to go to a beach that's close to a heavily populated city area, it probably is going to be crowded on weekends. If you don't like that and you love beaches, perhaps you should reassess where you live and consider moving somewhere else.
Number 9 is that we are completely opposite to the rest of the world. And what I mean by that is when we're in summer, the rest of the world is in winter. When they're in summer, we're in winter. I have never had a white Christmas, and I would love to have a white Christmas. Not to mention the time difference. If you wanted to communicate with people around the globe, you kind of have to plan with them when you want to call them or when you want to speak to them.
Someone needs to explain to her about northern and southern hemisphere. Yes, we might have summer when America is in winter, but there are other countries in the southern hemisphere who have seasons that align with ours. It's not just that Australia is this one little island that is completely backwards compared to the rest of the world, which is pretty much what she's saying here. Now, I get really tired of this argument of, oh, we can't communicate with people from other countries because we're on a different time zone. I have friends in America, I have friends in the UK, and I know what time of day I can communicate with them because I know when I'm awake and when they're awake, those are times I can communicate. And let's be real, even in Australia, if you're on the east coast and you want to talk to someone on the west coast of Australia, there is a time difference and you have to take that into account. But not only that, many of us have busy lifestyles, so sometimes it is hard to catch up with someone even in our own state because we have to try and match our lifestyle and our schedule with their schedule and find a time that works for both of us to catch up. So it's a pretty poor argument to make. And if you want to actually communicate with people, then you just figure out how to do it. It's really not that big an issue. And I mean, this is someone who sounds like she's Australian, so why is it such a dilemma for her? Does she not have any friends in Australia? So she needs to be able to communicate with her friends in other countries because they're the only friends she has? Sorry, that was a little bit of a snarky comment, but like I said, I get a bit tired of this argument that the time difference in Australia is such a horrible bad thing, because it isn't. It's just about figuring out schedules.
And number 10, like I mentioned before, hubby and I were quite lucky to visit quite a few places, and in doing so you kind of get a gist of how other people are living and what their work-life balance kind of is like. And I just want to say that for number 10, I really wanted to say a shitty work-life balance, because we work Monday to Friday 9 to 5, and I know most countries would have this. However, in saying that, because Australia is not as densely populated as some other countries are, we are not as developed. So everywhere that you go within Sydney, the city Sydney, is all developed because it's all touristic. We get a lot of visitors from the suburbs as well going into the city. There has been no development within the area that I live in. Well, there has, but not as much as Sydney. You won't see a club out here, and the only pub that are around are old pubs. Now, you you can Google this as well, and the average commute time for Australians is 66 minutes. And I don't know about you, but if I get home at 6 and I eat dinner and do whatever else I need to do when I get home, by the time I'm done, it's about 7 or 7:30. By the time I get ready and go out, it's about 8:30. If I want to be home at a decent time to get enough sleep for my health, I generally don't tend to go out and socialize as much as I would if I lived in the city. I feel that if we didn't work so much, we would have time to enjoy the things that we want to do. But at the same token, I completely understand that you need to work in order to have money and in order to have the things that you want in your life. I totally get that, and that's where sacrifices come in.
Okay, so for starters, at the time that she did this video, the average commute time was actually 40 minutes a day, and it is now increased to 48 according to statistics, not 66 minutes. So I'm not sure where she got that from. That actually sounds more like American commute times. So I think she's screwed up big time on her research here. That said, a lot of people don't commute that much for work. That's just an average. And that is looking at the bigger cities like Sydney and Melbourne. Unless you are in those bigger cities, then you're probably not commuting as much. Sure, if you are somewhere like Tasmania and you travel to a sort of a regional area for work, you might travel for an hour for work. But that would be if that's because you chose to do so, because there would be better options. But some people do that. Now, in terms of work-life balance in Australia being worse than other countries, that is why most people move to Australia, because the work-life balance in Australia is better. So what she is actually talking about here is she is someone who works in Sydney and has all that Sydney commute time. That's actually not representative of much of Australia. I don't know why she leaves work at 6 in the evening, but that's not representative of much of Australia. So if she's saying that she gets home at 7:30 at night, that is not representative of most people in Australia. Most people in Australia are going to be home by 5 o'clock, maybe 6 o'clock at the latest, depending on their working hours. And, you know, most people take their jobs seriously enough that they're not going to be going out partying on a weeknight, which is what she's implying that she likes to do. You might go somewhere for dinner one night during the week, but you're not going to be going out and having a late night. So that argument's pretty pathetic. And there's weekends. Australians love going places and doing things on the weekend because we can. So I think that's a pretty poor argument for her to be claiming that we have a poor work-life balance here in Australia, when compared to most other countries, we're streets ahead. And I think her argument for it kind of lost a lot of ground the further she got on. She was still going on about it when I stopped the video at this point. And I'm not going to go on with the rest of it because it's just the same sort of waffle. So I think, you know, she tried to make her point. She fell short of making that point, so let's not worry about listening to any more. So thanks for listening. If you're new, please subscribe. Please hit the like button and leave your thoughts below. Do you think this would have been an acceptable video had she titled it Things I Hate About Sydney? Do you think it is a misleading video? Do you think it is a little bit too negative, or do you think it's fine? Thanks for listening. Stay tuned. There'll be more soon.